Due Process, winner of 14 New York and Mid-Atlantic Emmys, including the 2009 awards for Best Interview Program and Best Discussion Series.
You want to give me one more?
Marijuana's a part of her day.
My hand is loosening up, but now it's better.
But it's not about getting high. Diane Rippertella has agonizing terminal ALS.
I need help with the
Medical marijuana, soon to be legal here in New Jersey. The pros, the cons, and the how. Up next on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.
So it's finally done. Marijuana for medicinal use has the green light here in New Jersey. But is it a way to ease the agony of the desperately ill, or just the first step towards full legalization? I'm Raymond Brown, and on this edition of Due Process, we look at what's next. Will it go too far? Will it not go far enough? We'll hear arguments from both sides, but first, as always, Sandy King sets the stage.
Raymond, the players have been fighting it out here in New Jersey for well over a decade. Many of the early advocates whose stories we told didn't live to see the battle won. And 13 other states got here before us. But each state's law is a little bit different, from the loose and liberal California approach to the tighter controls in states like Nevada. But proponents say our new law is the strictest in the country, and they sold it at the end of a tumultuous final session, with pleas from patients who are suffering more than most of us can even imagine.
Legalize it. Don't criticize it.
And legalize they finally did, at least for medical use, on the last day of a lame duck session, maybe because of heartbreaking testimony like this in committee months before.
My name is Diane. I am dying of ALS, which most people know is Lou disease. It's a fatal disease that has taken my life away and my independence.
It also causes crippling and excruciating pain, symptoms she says which are only eased by the contents of a pipe she can no longer hold.
My husband helps me and gives me the marijuana.
And just hours before the final critical vote, Diane Rippertella was back at the State House with one final tearful appeal.
For all that medication that I have, the only thing that works instantly for me is the marijuana.
And under the new law, her marijuana will finally be legal. Just months from now, but too late for some of the people we've met in the years since the fight for pot as therapy first began.
You don't make brownies, because I can't smoke it, but I can eat it.
It was 13 years ago that Cheryl Miller told us that pot made her MS more bearable.
Feel like you're about ready?
She's been dead for 6.5 years, but her husband Jim kept fighting. And 5 years ago, the parents of Sean McGrath shared their story with us. Their fear of being busted for supplying their son with the one thing that eased the agony of his cancer.
Here's someone who's dying, in the process of dying, and we're trying to think that maybe
a last drag might ease his pain or suffering, anxiety, whatever, and yet it's illegal.
And when the crucial votes were cast, they too were there.
A lot of other people will not have to go through the stigma that we had to go through of using illegal substance just to help our son feel better.
It's what this assemblyman's been preaching since he first introduced a bill for medicinal pot.
The compassionate use of marijuana and allowing medical advocates and physicians who prescribe such treatment, they'll be able to do that in this state.
It was one of the few times that Gusiora and this conservative colleague
let doctors prescribe a product that they think is helpful to their patients.
were on the same side, answering charges like this from opponents.
Look at California. It's a nightmare. If you talk to anybody out there in law enforcement, the problems of enforcement, the problems of control, the degradation of neighborhoods.
We are not adopting a California medical marijuana bill. This is for patients who truly need it.
It's like I can feel the burning in the leg, and it's almost like a vise is clamped around it.
Grandmother got cancer. The painkillers they give her included cocaine. So now if they could give her cocaine to kill that pain in the form of a cocktail that would knock your socks off, why can't they give her marijuana as well?
But it took plenty of trading and tightening up to sell their bill to majorities in both chambers.
There was a great fear that it would lead to the abuses that have been documented in California. So I look at this as a start.
The result, no homegrown pot, no more than 2 ounces a month, no California-like flexibility when it comes to who's eligible and who's not.
This country has an appetite for illegal drugs, and nothing in this bill is going to change that. It's just going to allow people that are at their sickest to be able to utilize this medicine.
People like Diane Rippertella.
I want to live, and I was diagnosed only 6 months after we got married. So nobody's going to stop me from doing what I need to do to have a normal life.
This bill is going to take me away from the criminal status and my daughter, who is my primary caregiver, who's a single mom with 2 kids and can't go to jail. And now she won't have to worry about that.
Thank you.
But legalization for a restricted group of patients won't take effect until June. By that time, there are supposed to be state dispensaries providing limited quantities of marijuana by prescription to only some severely ill patients. But Raymond, neither side is entirely satisfied.
Sandy, didn't medical marijuana advocates prevail?
Yes, they got a bill, and that was an enormous victory, but they didn't get quite the bill they wanted. Patients like Diane, whom we met in my report, say 2 ounces is less than they need in a month. Others say it will be too expensive, especially since you can't legally grow your own. But the other side says 2 ounces is too much, that it will wind up on the street, Raymond, and they point to what they say is a potentially dangerous loophole in the law.
And that's precisely where we'll pick up our discussion here in the studio after we hear what then candidate Chris Christie had to say when the question came up during the campaign.
Mr. Christie. Now listen, I want to do whatever we can do legally and responsibly to alleviate the awful suffering from people who have awful diseases that are causing them great pain. But given my law enforcement background, I also have to say that I agree with Mr. Daggett. The devil in this is going to be in the details. We do not want people who have a headache to be able to go and get medical marijuana. Where there is true pain and suffering that can be helped by this, I would be in favor of it. But there has to be sufficient legal safeguards to make sure we don't turn into California and everybody with a headache is going out and getting high.
So the new governor is not exactly an opponent, but he has been complaining about a loophole in the law that some fear could open the door to casual use and abuse of medicinal pot. Powell Stevenson from the Partnership for a Drug-Free New Jersey says the governor is right to be worried. We'll hear why. Roseanne Scotti, executive director of the New Jersey Drug Policy Alliance, insists that the naysayers have it all wrong. Welcome. Powell, let me start with you. What's the loophole about which the governor and some critics are concerned?
Well, there's a line in there that says, and I'm going to give you a liberal translation, obstinate musculoskeletal spasms.
And why is that viewed as a loophole?
Because a doctor can interpret that to mean a kid 18 years old can have a muscle spasm from playing sports and say that he can't treat it with normal methods and issue marijuana to him.
Okay. Now let me ask you this. There has been some criticism, and I'm going to come to you, Roseanne, I can feel you bridling, that the provision of the bill that permits the Department of Health to expand the diseases that might be covered. Are you concerned about that as a loophole as well? So there's a loophole in terms of one definition currently there and the possibility that the Department of Health might expand into areas where it should not.
Yes.
Roseanne, what's the response to that?
Well, neither of those are loopholes at all. In terms of the muscular spasticity, it's defined as a medical condition. A doctor knows what it means, and it also has to be resistant to currently available treatment. So that's hardly a loophole. In terms of adding conditions, that we are now the 14th state to have this kind of a law, and 10 of those states have that provision. All it does is allow the Department of Health and Senior Services to take testimony, let petitions and doctors, petition to add something down the road, and the Commissioner of Health and Senior Services is perfectly capable of doing that, and they're certainly not going to be adding headaches like Governor Christie.
Well, if the commissioner serves essentially at the pleasure of the governor, is there some view that there'd be a commissioner so irresponsible as to willy-nilly add diseases that are minor or that don't fit within the scope of what the legislature intended, especially after hearings held by the department?
That's certainly a possibility.
What experience anywhere has suggested that possibility? Because we keep hearing about California, which is a totally different experience.
Well, California is been the leader in the whole thing.
That's true. But California led down a different path, which isn't as tight as the New Jersey statute.
Yes, but that one phrase in there and the potential.
But has there been a state where a designated official has abused the power to take a look at new possible diseases, which would make us say, why? That's really a shocking abuse of power that makes us look at any such provision.
Well, quite frankly, it hasn't been around long enough in the other states to even really judge that.
Okay. Roseanne, let me ask you this. In the process of bringing this to fruition, and this has been a long, long fight, there were some things that were given up by advocates. What's the most significant thing that you had to give up, the most significant provision that you had to abandon in order to push this bill through the mill?
Well, one quick thing, just to respond to the previous comment. I mean, certainly these bills have been around in 13 other states for long enough that we certainly know that there is no health commissioner so irresponsible that they're okaying diseases okaying medical marijuana for, frivolous conditions. So we do have an answer to that. In terms of what we gave up, we certainly would have liked to have seen doctors have more discretion. The original bill really made it a situation where it was between a doctor and a patient, and doctors who are able to prescribe all sorts of powerful drugs like morphine and OxyContin,
but Roseanne, given the fact that
don't have that leeway for medical marijuana.
Two factors we have to throw in. One is that California, which is kind of an outlier, has been probably a bad example of what can happen if you don't have tight regulation. But on the other hand, it seems to me that if opponents are saying giving the Department of Health discretion to hold hearings to expand it, that you certainly would have had a much greater rebellion if you had given doctors broader discretion in terms of making the judgment.
Oh, absolutely. I think it was, giving that up was what we needed to make enough legislators comfortable to pass the bill. We thought it was an acceptable compromise. We think it leaves a lot of seriously ill patients out in the cold, and we certainly don't want to leave people like Diane Rippertella out in the cold. This should be a decision between doctors and patients.
Now, Roseanne has told us what she and her allies did to make the legislators comfortable. Do you feel that you were abandoned by some members who had been opponents but who had ultimately agreed to this bill? Is there any configuration of provisions that would cause you to permit medicinal use of marijuana?
Yes, if you get rid of that one loophole. I do not oppose medical marijuana for the truly sick.
So your
compassionate portion of it.
So you're concerned about one designated disease and the power of the commissioner. But let me ask you this. Given the controversy that that preceded this, a decade, 15 years of controversy, if you had to go back to the legislature every time the medical community reached a consensus about a new possible use within the framework of serious disease, don't you think that'd be a pretty awkward and, if not difficult, if not impossible, way to operate?
It could be difficult, but I think in order to control things, it has to happen.
Roseanne, do you think it would be
again,
even
I think
possible to
it
have a
would be
system?
absurd to go back to the legislature every time you needed to add a condition, every time you had a new condition. I mean, 20 years ago, we didn't know about HIV/AIDS. Now it's, one of the, most serious problems we face in terms of health in this country. And to have to go back every time would be awkward. It would be, take up the legislature's time. The Commissioner of Health and Senior Services is perfectly capable of doing what needs to get done to make sure conditions are added in a responsible manner.
Now that let me go to another aspect of what looks like the regulatory part of this process, but could have deeper implications. There are dispensaries. Do we know very much from the legislation about what those dispensaries are going to look like or how they're going to operate?
Yeah, the legislation is actually very detailed. I mean, people who want to have a dispensary have to go through very, very thorough background checks. The Commissioner of Health and Senior Services is involved. The Attorney General's office is involved. They cannot have any criminal history in terms of drug possession or sales. They are limited in how much marijuana they can, give to people.
Are you going to be ready in June?
Well, the bill becomes effective in June, and then there's 3 months for regulations to be promulgated. We may not be ready in June.
So when do you see the first dispensary?
We would hope certainly within a year. If you look at what's going on in other states, it took the state of New Mexico, who passed their law about 2 years ago, it took them about a year altogether to get their system up and running. So I think a year is reasonable.
And do we see a cottage industry ahead of dispensaries set up wherever there are clusters of people who are going to be found under the legislation to be in need?
I think it's a possibility because they haven't gone beyond the original 6 locations.
Now, what is your thought about the symbolic nature of this? I think you get the sense from hearing the opposition that while there is strong opposition, it isn't rooted so much in the details of this bill or any other bill, but a broad concern that we're sending the wrong signal, that marijuana is not something to be labeled as bad and cast aside, but something more complex that has some positive uses, although it's not recreationally proper.
Yeah, I think it really is, in terms of New Jersey doing this now, huge symbolic significance. And I think you're seeing even people who, technically have concerns about medical marijuana, actually support allowing seriously ill people. This is an issue that has overwhelming support from people here in New Jersey and actually across the country. We wouldn't have gotten a bill in New Jersey unless a whole lot of legislators were getting a whole lot of pressure from lots of constituents. And I think we've reached a tipping point on this.
Because I think maybe you'd have a different view about the symbolism of it. Is that part of what disturbs you, that there is, no matter how you structure this, a message that says, especially to young folks, marijuana is not something to be consigned to the garbage bin. It does potentially have use?
Absolutely. I work with Save a Friend, which is a group of concerned parents that are working with our local high school on substance abuse. And it's absolutely the wrong message to send to the kids that marijuana is fine. I mean, they're using Oxycontin, they're using marijuana, they're using everything now.
Is it possible to send them the message that life's more complicated than black and white, and that there are some substances that are generally not to be used for recreation but have some value?
Well,
I mean, Assemblyman Carroll kind of made that argument about cocaine in the clip we saw in Sandy's package.
Yeah, I think that most kids will interpret, oh, good, it's a medicine, and now it's fine, and I'm going to use it.
So do you believe that it's likely that the passage of this bill and the establishment of dispensaries is likely to set up a general view among kids that it's more proper to use marijuana?
Yes, I really do.
Do you see this as a step in the direction of legalization?
Yes, absolutely. If you look at the chronologic steps, needle exchange, medical marijuana, legalized marijuana, legalized drugs.
You mean across the board legalization?
Across the board. That's the overall goal.
Roseanne, I know you want to respond to that, but let me ask you a different question, and then you can roll your answers together. Imagine this hypothetical. The legislation goes into effect without a hitch. It's all set up, and then some outrageous thing occurs. Some person licensed to use, or a caregiver licensed to use it, sells it in a school zone, or something that gets huge publicity around the state. 1 or 2 bad cases that suggest that this is really subject to abuse, but not statistically meaningful. Do you think that would be enough to have the legislature quickly revisit the statute?
I don't think so. I think there's such, again, overwhelming support among people in New Jersey and among the legislature that one or two incidents aren't going to be a problem. And I think, again, to go back to what message it sends, you know, allowing seriously ill people access to medical marijuana, it doesn't send any different message than allowing seriously ill people access to morphine or OxyContin or other things. You're not saying street use of heroin is okay because you allow seriously ill people access to morphine.
How do you respond to serious people who say, as Powell just said, but I see in my lifetime a movement that's sort of the domino falling? That first it's needle exchange and medical marijuana, that your real agenda, the agenda of you and your allies, is to have a full range of decriminalization or legalization of a number of drugs that are harmful.
I think, you know, what we're seeing in terms of changes in the law are the legislature, not just in New Jersey, but around the country, revisiting the mistakes of the past. You know, we did not allow access to clean needles 20 years ago. We ended up with a horrific HIV epidemic and losing lives.
But there are still people who
we should have acted then,
just let me
and
interrupt
we're recognizing the
I know
mistakes
it's rude,
of the
but
past.
let me interrupt you. But I'm saying there are people who in good faith, as Powell is in good faith, and I think there are others, who really believe that legalization, that the use of needles and the legalization of medicinal marijuana are really just tactical maneuvers that are part of a broader effort for those who honestly believe that there should be a broader range of decriminalizing drugs. Not all drugs, but a broader range of drugs. And how do you respond to that belief? Because I think that belief exists in some people of goodwill who look at this and say, we see the erosion of what was once a clear, unequivocal position.
I think that there are some people of goodwill who believe this. I also think that it's a bit of a red herring for people who like to look at changes that are being made, whether it's needle exchange, whether it's medical marijuana, whether it's sentencing reform. These are common sense, these are evidence-based, these are practical changes.
But there are also people of goodwill who want full legalization.
They can't find an answer to these, you know, evidence-based practices, and so what they do is they raise the specter of drug legalization and chaos and all these things, and I don't know that that's actually a goodwill argument on the part of some of these people.
But there actually are people in the country who argue for decriminalization. There are a number of
there
organizations.
are, absolutely.
So, I mean, there are you can have goodwill on both sides, and I guess my
Sure.
question was, given the fact that you seem to be making at least some steps that are leading to some legislative victories, are there conscious efforts to reassure those who believe in good faith that this is just the stalking horse for a full decriminalization of a broad spectrum of drugs?
I'm not exactly sure what would give them that level of comfort. I think you have to look at each of these issues on its own. You know, we certainly believe that we should have a more common sense approach to drugs in terms of how we treat them and whether or not we do not believe people should be punished for what they put into their own bodies. That's certainly a principle of ours. And so whether or not that would give them a level of comfort, I mean, we believe in policies that are based on evidence. We believe in looking at things in a holistic way and looking at the harms that come from our current policies.
Two more quick questions in here. One is, there were a couple of people in that package who had testified at the legislature that they need really 3, 4, 5 ounces in order to get the relief they need. What do you think is going to happen to them under a statute that's pretty clear that you can only get 2 ounces a month? What's your speculation, and how do you feel about it, Powell?
They probably will try to get more.
Does that trouble you? Do you think that should have given the legislature pause to have greater discretion in how much could be dispensed, to give it to doctors or to the health department?
I think there needs to be some safeguards in there. And truly, if a patient that's suffering, and not somebody that just twisted their back, if they, through their doctor, know that they need more, that's fine.
Do you see any likelihood that the legislature might revisit this for people like some of the folks we saw in the package who had testified they need more than the 2 ounces?
Absolutely.
I mean, they're going to be back on the black market, one can assume, and they're very sympathetic cases.
We hope that eventually the legislature will revisit this, because certainly we don't want people like Diane Ripatella, or actually in this case her husband, going to the black market if 2 ounces isn't enough and if it's less than what her doctor would like.
Are you predicting that if you went back to the legislature in the short term, you could get that?
I don't know in the short term. I think if you look at what's going on in some other states. The state of Washington originally allowed a smaller amount of marijuana, and a couple years ago, their Department of Health and Senior
I take that as
Service
guarded optimism
increased
and a
the
requirement
amount.
that you both have to come back and see us again because we're out of time.
Absolutely.
My thanks to
Thank
Roseanne
you.
Scotty and Powell Stevenson. That's it for this edition of Due Process. But the medicinal marijuana story is just one of many we'll continue to follow through this season and beyond. For now, for Sandy King and all of us here at Due Process, thanks for watching.
Well, I think just for medicinal purposes, it's not a problem, as long as it's controlled.
And maybe we can even tax it, get some revenue.
Cancer patients, yes. Terminally ill, yes.
There'll be people using it who don't have any kind of medical problem that they have to use it for.
From the time it's prescribed to the time it's delivered to the person's home, it should be monitored.
There are other options out there, you know, as a painkiller and everything.
Actually legalize it will kind of control some of the violence and some of the mayhem that goes out in these streets.
Well, if they're gonna label it medicinal purposes, then that's where the line should be drawn. It should be given to you by a doctor, I suppose.
It grows naturally, so I have absolutely no problems with it for medicinal purposes.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.